I found them very useful in very specific contexts, right? If I
Hmm.
want to write a program, it's a great for me. It's a great way to get a rough draft of that program. Um, the catch is, I don't want to just like run the program and have it work, but I want to teach. I want to create a program that I can use to teach. And so the generative AI is sort of a somewhat of a mess in terms of like it gives me a rough draft, but it's a very rough draft because it like changes coding style halfway through. It doesn't, some the comments are sometimes useful, sometimes not useful at all. Sometimes the code is very dense, and sort of hard to understand, and you have to like pick it apart. And that's sort of been my experience in general. Is like everything that I get out of it is a rough draft and pretty rough in terms of the way I want to use it specifically. Is I want to be able to teach people from it, and that means I've spent a lot of time cleaning it up, but and streamlining it, and maybe breaking down some of the more complicated lines into multi-line statements. You know, but it gets me started, and it
Yeah.
does that for a lot of things. It just gets me started on a lot of things. If I like with wording, if I'm trying to explain something, I can get a very, very rough draft of that from Chat GPT or any of the generative AIs. And what it does, which is awesome, is it turns what I call the blank page problem into an editing problem. The blank page is like the most intimidating thing ever, when the screen is completely blank and you can put anything there you want. um that can be very intimidating to even know where to begin, and ChatGPT gives me a place to begin, and all of a sudden I've got stuff that I can go, oh, this isn't really what I want, but I can change it, to make it
Yeah.
what I want. And it's much easier for me to see what changes need to be done to something that's already on the page than it is to just look at a blank page and figure, start from there. And so it's in that respect, it makes things a little faster.
Hi, friends, and welcome to this very exciting episode of Leading with Data. Today, I have with me Joshua Starmer, or Josh, as I'll be calling him, who is founder and CEO of StatsQuest with Josh Starmer. He's also ex-lead AI educator at Lightning AI, and he's really passionate about teaching data science, writing and recording songs, and then is truly a multifaceted personality. His YouTube channel is immensely popular. I think he has more than 1 million followers on the YouTube channel, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with Josh to learn what he does so beautifully. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So, Josh, I would love to start from how you got into this domain, and what were early days for you like.
Yeah. So, how did I get into this field? I mean, you could go back pretty far. I've always been interested in computers and using computers.
Hmm.
And writing programs. That's something I did as a kid. Um, but I didn't really get into data analytics and sort of machine learning until relatively late. I'd gone to college. I got a degree in
Hmm.
computer science, and I was working in a hospital at the time doing database work, and it was a lot of fun. But for various reasons, I took a biology course. I'd never taken a biology class
Hmm.
before, and I took a college level. It was biology 101. It was for freshmen. It was one of these classes that's relatively large. I think there was about 150 or 200 people in the room. It's a
Hmm.
big auditorium, uh, and it met at 8 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I absolutely loved it. It was one of the most fun classes I'd ever taken,
Hmm.
and I was a little annoyed that I had a degree in computer science all of a sudden. I wish I knew biology, and I wish I could do biological stuff. And so I
Interesting.
spent the next couple of years trying to figure out how I could get a job in a biology lab doing biology rather than computer stuff. Um, and basically everyone I talked to were like, you have to, it takes a long time of training. There's a lot of skills you have to develop. You've got these computational skills. What are you doing? Go stay doing that stuff. And y- you know, I was really determined, and so I ended up contacting someone who did computer stuff in a lab, and I said, well, if I can't do lab work, maybe I can do computer stuff in a lab. And I asked them for advice about what they were doing and how did they get their job. And they said, they recommended a sort of a graduate program that I could study in, and that would get me prepared to be doing analytical stuff in a laboratory.
Interesting.
And so I signed up for that, and I was accepted, and I got a PhD. But the
Wow.
goal was still, I think, a PhD in something called bioinformatics, which is basically statistics applied to biological data. But
Biology.
my goal was still to do biological research rather than sort of analytical stuff. Even I just felt like I was getting closer to it, but I still really wasn't at my goal. And so I eventually got a job in a genetics laboratory at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and um, I I got the job sort of as the analytical guy in the group, but with the understanding that I would finally learn how to do experimental work, and they would let me do experimental work. And so I was really
Interesting.
excited about this job, and they were great. They taught me how to do all kinds of experimental stuff. They sent me away to a special program, like
Mm-hmm.
a boot camp, like a learn how to do all these experiments in 3 weeks type boot camp. And I did that,
Interesting.
and it turned out that I even though I'd always wanted to do experiments, it turned out I hated doing experiments. It really
So
wasn't for me, and that all the advice I'd been given over the years that to not go that direction was actually very good
turned out to
advice.
be true.
It
Mm-hmm.
was perfect advice. I was just being very stubborn. That being
Interesting.
said, one really cool thing happened from learning how to do all those experiments, which was I learned, at least in mouse genetics, that getting data is very difficult and very time consuming and very expensive. And as a result of that, it made me want to be a better data analyst. I'd taken some statistics courses in graduate school, and I'll be honest, I didn't really understand any of it. Other than, like, I understood that there was a thing called the t-test. There was and you could plug numbers in, and I had a rough idea of what the output meant, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really understand it very well. And so when I realized how difficult it was to gather data for me to be even doing statistics on it, people would give me a spreadsheet of their data, and there'd be like a handful of data points or whatever. It's usually pretty meager.
Mm-hmm.
At first I was like, well, why can't you get me tons of data? And but then when I learned how hard these experiments were, I understood that they were doing everything they could to
Yeah.
get me as much data as possible. So once I realized how hard it was, it made me want to be a better statistician and someone who's better with data. And so that's sort of how my YouTube channel started, was me trying to teach myself statistics. It was my statistics
Wow.
quest, my quest into learning statistics. And
Interesting.
and so that's where StatQuest comes from, is and I ended up doing, I ended up successfully teaching myself statistics in a way that was very good, and actually made me a people that I made me someone that people really like to work with statistics, because not only did I understand it very well and I'd appreciate how little data they have, but I also was able to explain exactly what I was doing with their data and why I was doing it and what was happening, and sort of what it meant. And people liked all that. And so that kind of got me on my pathway towards, uh, you know, my YouTube channel,
Mm-hmm.
becoming a statistician, and ultimately uh, moving into machine learning and sort of data science
Mm.
techniques and things like that. Especially with machine learning, is being because that started coming online and people started asking me about that. I wasn't using it at the time, but other people were, and they would say, "Well, how does this random forest works?" And I'd say, "I have no idea." So I had to go on another quest to learn how those things worked. And I would also, just in the building, I'd be sitting there kind of doing my work, and I just overhear people talking on the phone or talking to each other. And sometimes they would talk about analytical techniques that I didn't understand. Like I remember hearing one woman down the hallway talk about using regularization,
Mhm.
and I was like, "Oh, what is that?" Um, and so I had to go on a quest for that too, and figure it out. Whenever I hear something that I didn't understand, I wanted to learn it, and as a result, I'd make videos, so I would learn, and then other people would learn as well, um,
Wow,
from how I
great.
learned.
Great,
Yeah.
phenomenal journey. And then on the from timeline perspective, so how much time did you spend pursuing biology as a career? So if you were to put these events on a
Yeah.
timeline,
Yeah.
when
So
was
I was
this?
actually is I was actually I worked in this lab for 13 years.
Wow. That's a
Yeah.
long period.
It was a long time. I had a lot of fun. I worked with great people. We did really cool stuff, really cool research.
Mhm.
And I really loved working there. While I was in the lab is when I started, like I was saying in the story, is when I started doing StatQuest and making the videos. And so there was a lot of overlap between when I was in the lab trying to make a career as a biologist, but also, developing a potential career in YouTube, which for a long time was just for fun, and it's something I enjoyed doing. With the goal, well, the original goal for StatQuest wasn't necessarily to make a channel that was very popular.
Mhm.
I was really just trying to, like I said earlier, that one of the things I thought was important was that the people I worked with understood what I was doing with their data and why I was doing it and what the results meant. So I was really making the channel for them. And if you watch
Mhm.
any of my early videos, you'll know that all of my examples that I use are mice. I'll say a
Yeah.
mouse weight, mouse height. We'll look at the genetics of mice and things like that, or gene expression in mice. All these examples are taken straight out of the lab I was working in, because the idea was to communicate the statistical methodology to these specific people, my coworkers. And I had about 10 coworkers, um give or take. And so I was really specifically addressing them. And and so when I started the channel, you know not many people watched it, and but the thing is I wasn't expecting or even really desiring for a lot of people to watch it. What I wanted
Right.
was my coworkers to watch it. And I had so in the first year I got one of my videos on something called R squared, uh
Mhm.
that got 9 views. And for a lot of people would be like, well, that's a failure of a YouTube channel, but for me it was a huge success,
Right.
because it meant, of the handful of people I worked with, someone, they were watching my video. And I think I got like 2 subscribers from it.
Wow.
And so that was a huge success for me, because I was achieving my goals, however modest they might have been. It was just, the point wasn't really to make a big channel for the whole world. Really, it was just to communicate with my coworkers in a way that they could relate to and understand. And I felt like I was succeeding on that level. And so that was great for me. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
And this would also have been the period where DNA sampling and dealing, that has always been a huge problem because of the size of the data. So was that something which you kind of explored while you were in this field, or you always wanted to be doing experiments in the lab and not go in the information side of it in that sense?
Y- yeah. So, when I went into my, to give you a sense of how old I am, when I was in my PhD program, they were just starting to get the results of these big, huge sequencing projects, like the human's genome
Right.
uh, thing, and they're they would they'd sequenced a bacteria. Now you could sequence a bacteria without even like thinking about it, but back then it took them like 4 years.
Correct.
Um, and and so that the sort of like that, those large sort of like what they call big data, those big data sets were starting to show up.
Mhm.
But what happened is when I got this job at UNC, that's when things really started to blow up. This thing called high throughput sequencing or next
Yeah.
generation sequencing technologies came online, and all of a sudden it became relatively easy to sequence a ton of stuff very fast. That was around 2008, 2009 when that happened. And all of a sudden, yeah, it went from like I was doing basic statistics analysis, real basic, doing stuff you could probably do in Microsoft Excel. I was doing that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, I was optimizing analytical pipelines on huge clustering computers um, because they were able to generate this data, but nobody actually knew what to do with the data once you
Right.
had it.
Mm.
And but we had some what they called research computing at the university, which meant they had a cluster that they'd mainly been using for sort of the physics department, where they were like simulating how atoms would interact with each other and molecular interactions. I think the chemistry department was using it as well. So I got some access to that computer and was able to start creating these analytical pipelines for these really large data sets that were coming online. These where they and so it was a lot of fun because back then there weren't any standard operating procedures. We just had to make it up as we went along. We'd come up with our own statistical procedures and our own visualization techniques, and over time that stuff got standardized, probably for the better. Um, but it was a lot of fun, and I had a great time just sort of helping people do data analysis. And this is also about the time when I realized how much I did not like doing the experiments anymore. The experiments. I mean, there's probably a lot of I mean, I don't know if there's a lot of biologists listening to this, but I have a lot of respect for biologists because the failure rate in biology is very high. The chance that your experiment is going to succeed is very low,
Yeah.
and some of these experiments take a week or something like that, and take a long time. Some can take years because you've got to develop a mouse or whatever. Uh and and the failure rate is so high, and these guys and these men and women that do these experiments, it's amazing because they just somehow they don't let that defeat get to them. Whereas for
Yeah.
me, I'd always get depressed. I'd be like, oh my gosh, this failed. And they're like, yeah, just do it again. I mean, you probably messed something up. You probably didn't stir it enough, or you probably didn't shake it enough, or you probably left it at room temperature for too long. I mean, there's a million things that can go wrong in any one of
Correct.
these experiments. And so they're just like, just do it again. You probably get it right the next time, or the third time, or the fourth time, or the fifth time. So it was really disappointing and hard to do the work. And I was like, I like computing because what I like about computing is when things fail, I can at least learn something really, I can almost always learn something cool from that failure.
Yeah.
Whereas with the experimental failures, if like I left something at room temperature for too long or something like that, there wasn't a whole lot to learn from that. So I would always just feel like it was time down the tube rather than um, a moment for education, which is the way I always felt things were on the computational side. Even with failure, I would still grow and learn more as a result of it. So I was pretty quick. I did experiments for a couple of years, but I was quick to get back on the analytics train and just spend all my time doing that because I felt it, I just it was way more fun for me ultimately, even though I wanted to do the biology stuff.
And just out of curiosity, you mentioned that specific class which you were doing as the point which introduced you to the field and then made you go after the field. And
Yeah.
so, was there anything specific in that class? So, was it the teacher? Was it the subject? What was
Yeah.
that changed?
Yeah, it was all of the above. I loved the teacher. I thought he was fantastic. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved the material, and all of the material I loved. It just blew my mind. It was all molecular biology. I think the whole semester was molecular biology. So it was about like I don't know, really small things. And but I especially loved the section on DNA, learning about how cells replicate, how DNA is used to be transcribed into RNA, and then that turns into protein, and protein function as an enzyme, and enzymes are how things get done in your body. And I loved learning about all that stuff. One of the things that was really funny is I told you that this was a class that had 150 or 200 students. It was a huge class. Um, but I was really excited about it. But I didn't want to sit on the very first row because I felt like that should be reserved for because I didn't actually pay for this class. I made a deal with the professor. The
Mm-hmm.
deal was this: he would let me sit in on the class, and I would do lab work for him afterwards. Because
Interesting.
I already had I was working full time in a hospital at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would do is I would go to the class on the way to work, and I'd sit in the class, and then I would go to work, and I'd work all day, and then on the way home I'd work for a couple hours in the lab. So he was letting me work. He was letting me take the class basically for free, or for a minimal amount of lab work. He was interested
Interesting.
in snails, and so I would spend my afternoons. He'd have these snails living in plastic cups, and I'd spend the afternoon circling the snails on the cups so we could get a count of how many snails were in each cup. I don't really actually understand what the experiment was, but I just remembered like just with a pen every afternoon I would just draw a circle around each snail on the cup. And but anyways, what I sat on the second row, and this was 8 a.m. and not everyone is a morning person. I am a morning person. I love waking up in the morning and kind of getting started and doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the students in these classes in were not morning
No,
people,
no. Mm-hmm.
and they'd partied very hard the night before, and they would show up to class at 8 a.m. half awake, just completely out of it. But I was really into it, and I was alert, and I loved it. And so over time, even though there was 150 or 200 people, there's a lot of people in the room. The class just became a conversation between me and the teacher. Uh,
Interesting.
because I was the only one who was really awake and really alert and really paying attention to what was going on. So I was the only one who ever had a question. And so he would go, "Josh, surprise, there's a question from you." And I'd go, "Well, what about this? And what about that?" And he goes, "Those are great questions." And then we'd end up in this conversation about biology, and it ended up being as if he was a private tutor for me. And I loved that experience so much. And I actually, it didn't go without notice to the rest of the students, and he got a lot of negative comments for just focusing his attention on me. You, you
Okay.
know, um, but the thing is those students, if they'd wanted attention, they could have gotten. I wasn't like intentionally hogging it. I was just really the
Yeah.
only one who ever raised my hand and asked. Um,
Interesting.
so yeah, so
Very.
that was that class. It was the biology 101 at the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. And it was an absolutely wonderful experience.
Interesting. And once you started your YouTube channel,
Mhm,
and obviously, as you mentioned, the initial few videos would see few likes, but at that time you were, in a way, building these videos or creating these videos for yourself.
mhm.
Uh, did that continue, and for like how long, or and was there a period where something went viral, and so how did that evolve?
Yeah, so, you know, after, that first year, I got 9 views, not that many. But the second year I did it, I had one video, and I don't know if it went viral, but a lot of people watched it in a relatively shorter period of time.
Mhm.
And it was on a very, very esoteric, um, biological thing. I think the videos, I think it's called RPKM versus FPKM versus TPM, which
Okay.
are, just a bunch of acronyms. Um, but within a small community, those
That
acronyms were
can.
I mean, they're baffling to everybody. but within a small community, not only are those acronyms baffling, but they're actually important to understand. And
Mhm.
and so there were some chat rooms, and so people started sharing my video on those chat rooms, and so that video started taking off, which was crazy. That kind of blew my mind because I wasn't expecting anyone to watch a movie called RPKM versus FPKM versus TPM. That just sounds like the most boring video title ever created by anyone on the entire planet. And so I was surprised anyone watched that one, and let alone it kind of went viral in its own little way. And that kind of that shifted my perception of my video making all of a sudden. I suddenly realized that there was a larger audience for what I was doing.
Mhm.
And so at that point I started trying to make when I would make videos, I would make videos with larger um with more general examples. Or I would say, imagine you have mice, but if you're not into mice, imagine you have businesses and you're talking about market capital. Or if you're not into business, imagine you've got you're a teacher and you've got a classroom full of students. So I would start trying to generalize the way I was teaching so that it could be approachable from a larger audience. And I eventually did that with one video called Principal Component Analysis, or PCA, clearly explained. And once that video came out, it just took off. And that came out almost 8 years ago, and
Mhm.
and it's still one of my best viewed videos of all time.
Right.
It's people love that one, and and that was a big turning point for me. That PCA video, it went from me sort of educating a very small community to all of a sudden educating a relatively large community, and that changed everything. And it wasn't very long afterwards that I actually quit the job in the laboratory and started doing StatQuest full time.
Interesting. And how many videos had you created by the time that RPKM versus TPM video went
Yeah,
viral to the PCA video? So how many
yeah.
videos?
I don't really know, but I think I'd made the RPKM, that really weird sounding one. I made that. That was maybe my 10th video, or within the first 10 videos that I'd made. And I
Mhm.
think PCA was probably maybe in the first 20 or 30 videos.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't, maybe in the top 20, and that was when things changed. I think I've got something like 200 videos at this point. Um, but yeah, that PCA one is relatively early on, in the
And how has your process of creating these videos changed over time? So you mentioned that you were initially creating this for yourself, and whenever you
yeah.
would hear a term, you would go on that quest, and I'm presuming that would translate into some videos on the channel. But is the process still the same? And then how do you select a topic, think about the video, the storyboarding, and then the actual productionization?
Yeah, so, yeah, early on, all my videos were things that people in the lab needed to know,
Hmm.
specifically. And so or someone had asked me, they're like, I need to understand this. Can you explain this to me? And I'd say, no, I can't. But let me work on it, and I'll come back to you in a month or two, and maybe I can explain it to you then. Uh, but Yeah, so it used to be, it was very specific. I knew I knew what my coworkers were doing. I knew what they were doing analytically because I was the one doing it for them. So I knew
Hmm.
exactly what concepts they needed to learn in order to understand the analysis that was happening with their data. Um, However, once I left the lab, it's become much more abstract, in that I don't really know what people are doing anymore. I mean, I know the general trends. Obviously, I know
Hmm.
ChatGPT is incredibly popular. I know people want to learn how to use it. They want to learn how to code it and all those things. I know that stuff, but I don't actually know very much about what they're doing, use cases what they're doing with it and how they're doing it, and sort of what the pros and the cons have been. And so I've been trying to like create ways that I can get myself into situations where I can learn these things. So I've started going out and doing workshops and working with people, just like as if I was in the lab.
Hmm.
But now it's a excuse me, now it's a very short term re- relationship where I just spend a weekend with people, kind of working with them. But it gives me enough time to see what they're doing, why they want, what their motivations are, and I can learn a lot about it. So that's been a big change, though, is becoming a full time educator, and I'm actually or a full time YouTuber, and I'm actually toying with the idea of doing more consulting or actually getting a job in a lab again, or a part time job in a lab again, just so I can be a little closer to what's really happening.
Hmm.
And just so I have a better sense of what's going on, and sort of because it's not it's I mean, it's one thing to just to look at all these things that people are teaching and go, well, I can teach that too. I can teach that as well. But it's another thing when you've actually had personal experience with it, and you know what the pros and the cons are, what its strengths and weaknesses are, and you know that from personal experience, not just from like reading about it. And I feel like that personal experience, it really is valuable, and it's something that can separate sort of a good educator from a great educator. And
Yeah.
I would love to be a great educator. I mean, that's my goal, is to be the best that I can be at what I do. Um, and so it is tempting for me to kind of like get back into an environment where I'm actually using and doing all these things. And so I can not just speak from like the textbook, but also from experience, and give and help people focus on what's really important, because when you unless you do it yourself, it's hard to or excuse me, it's easy to be confused or misdirected about things that aren't as important as other details, or because otherwise they all look important to you.
Yeah.
um yeah.
Interesting. And when you quit your lab job and went full time into StatQuest,
Hmm.
uh, what was the thought, or so was there a vision you were building, or if someone were to ask you at that time what is StatQuest,
Yeah.
what would your answer be?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. At the time, I'll be honest, um I mean, I knew it was my personal quest in trying to learn things, but at the time I wasn't making any money. And I had some savings from my job. I had enough money to make it through the year. I could pay for my rent, I could pay for my groceries, I could pay taxes, I could do things like that. Um and so what I did is I gave myself a year to see if I could support myself from the channel, and I was really freaking out at that first. Um it My old boss, you know, had a big part in me deciding to do StatQuest full time. In that he goes, we were I was talking with him. We were doing this like biweekly sort of like check in to see how what my progress is, what my progress report would be. And he's like, you know, you're gonna have to start doing your own research again, because the way the lab is right now, you can't, there's not as much need for you to be doing what you've been doing, and now you need to be doing more research and applying for grants. And I knew I wasn't going to do well in that. I knew I would fail. And during that meeting is when we decided that I would leave the lab. And I never thought about it. I thought I was going to work in that lab for the rest of my life. I had no expectations of ever leaving it, because I was completely happy doing what I was doing and then making these videos on the side. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was really well balanced, and it was nice to have sort of a steady guaranteed income.
Hmm.
Um, but during that meeting, we decided it was time for me to leave. And I left at the end of the month not really knowing how I was gonna make it work. It was very scary. I wasn't making any money, but I like I said, I had some savings. And and so when I first quit, the job, one of the first things I started doing is a lot of consulting. Um, and I did so much consulting that I was basically just doing my old job, like I was doing it before. And I wasn't
Right.
working on StatQuest full time at all. I was hardly working on StatQuest at all. And so I had to consciously say, okay, I like the money, but I need to not do the consulting because it's too distracting. There's some irony to that because now I'm like, maybe I should get back into consulting. But at the time, the goal was definitely to establish my channel as a source of income and something I could make a living with. And so I did a lot of consulting early on, and then I quit that. I cut it all out, and I said, no, you got to figure out how to make the channel work. And so what I did is I started making these little PDF study guides, and like linear regression, and like a little 5-page PDF document and I would sell them for a couple of US dollars, not too much. Um, and I was selling those, and I was also doing sort of coding workshops, and those doing those two things really shifted my approach, and it let me like the especially the study guides. The study guides were basically my videos, but in paper format, or in PDF as opposed to a video. And it made me realize that not only could I make videos, but I could also possibly write a book, because
Mhm.
I thought about writing a book, but I'm not actually great with words, especially writing words. Like I can talk all day, as you're seeing right now. I've no problem just running my mouth, but I have a lot of difficulty putting things down on paper, like writing words on paper. But when I made the study guides, I realized that I could actually, instead of writing it, I could draw it. I could just draw a bunch of pictures, and I could create my little characters. I got this little guy named StatsQuest, and I got a little dinosaur called the Normalsaurus, and I could have them have little conversations, and we could talk about data analysis, and it could all be very visual, just like a comic book. And I did that for my study guides, and once I figured out I could do that for my study guides, it dawned on me that I could do it as a book. And once I figure out how to make the book work, um, I was able to start making enough money that was comparable to what I'd been making before when I was working in the lab. And so and that's basically when I declared success. I was like, this is successful. I'm making as
Interesting.
much money as I was before, and that's really what my goal was. And so with the book plus the videos, um, it ended up working out.
Interesting. And we didn't speak about the actual process of creating these videos. So
Yeah.
can you
Yeah, yeah.
elaborate a bit of that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they almost always start with me being confused, and I'll hear someone talk about something, or nowadays someone will post a comment about a methodology, and and they'll say, can you talk about make a video about this thing, and I'll look at whatever it is. For example, there are these relatively new models called state space models,
Yeah.
and I've read a little bit about state space models, but I don't really understand how they work at all. I Yeah, I understand some really big picture things, but none of the details. And so, but people started putting them on my in the comments. And so, for example, so this is how if I was going to make a video on state space models, what I would do is the very first thing I would do is I would read everything I could find about it. Um I don't a lot of people watch YouTube videos, obviously, and I make YouTube videos for people to watch, but I tend to not watch other people's YouTube videos. And one of the reasons why is I don't want to copy them. And I'm afraid if I see what they do, I'll want to do what they do. And so I
Yeah.
try to avoid videos specifically, but I will read everything I can find. And so that's what I would do for state space models. I'd read every single thing I could find, and chances are I probably won't understand any of it. I might understand a little bit, but very little overall. And so what I do at that point is I reread everything, because sometimes what you read a bunch of stuff and none of it makes any sense, but you start seeing terms popping up a lot, over and over again. People start talking about one thing or they're talking about another thing, and but you see it in article after article that people refer to this one concept. And so at that point, I will try to drill down specifically on whatever that concept is, that keeps popping up in everybody's article, and I'll try to learn about that. And the way I try, and then I read everything there is to be about that. And sometimes if it's a tough concept, I won't understand anything there either. But I'll start seeing terms that are occurring a bunch of times, and so I'll then drill down on those, and you just keep drilling down until I finally understand something. And once I understand something, I can start coming back up, layer for layer, until I finally understand the overall concept. And in the process of doing all that, I often will code my own examples, uh,
Mhm.
to um, to see if I can't recreate what people have done. Um, and usually I can't, and so I have to figure out what's wrong with my understanding. Why is it not working out, the way it worked out for them? And usually I do a lot of learning at that point when I go, these numbers aren't adding up. And so I do a lot of coding as part of my learning experience as well. So lots of reading and then lots of coding, and then ultimately it the coding works and can validate the fact that I understand what's going on, and then I start trying to come up with illustrations, ways to sort of understand it visually, because that's the big key for me, is being able to see things. I have to see it, to understand it, and so I start coming up with illustrations, and the whole process can take anywhere from a month to, some of my videos took years, like several years to make, like that PCA video took about 2 years
Mhm.
to make.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of effort and time. But I was almost hearing you, and in my mind, I was thinking that's almost like a neural network for each video in itself. So each time you are going down, you are essentially creating another layer, and then you are abstracting it out. So very
exactly.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Uh, and are there videos or quests which you start, but then they don't end up coming out? When 2 years is time for a video
Yeah.
which has come out, I'm
Yeah.
presuming there would be a few which are either in work still or don't come out for some reason or the other.
Yeah, so, it's now that, when I was doing it, when I was working in the lab, if I got to a concept I really couldn't understand, I could abandon it with no real worries. It was not that big a deal. Nowadays, it's very expensive for me to abandon something, because if I spend months of time on something, and I have nothing to show for it, then that's very expensive. And so it's kind of an incentive to double down and really figure this out, and not and make sure that every video I do, ultimately it works out. There are still a couple of concepts that I've been having difficulty with. There's something called partial least squares, and I take a stab at that about every other year. I'll spend a couple of weeks trying to, see if I can't make it any further in my understanding there, and I get close, but I never quite get it. And I think I it's like one of these things where I superficially understand it, but I don't understand it deep enough to really explain what's going on.
Mhm.
And I haven't really made much progress, and I just keep chipping away. And maybe sometime 10 years from now I'll finally get it,
And
but it's
yeah.
I have a couple of topics that are sort of on the back burner, and when I have free time or on vacation or nothing's really going on, I'll poke around at them and see if I can't get a little closer to understanding it. But those are relatively rare these days. And to be honest, and I don't want to brag, but I've been doing this long enough that I'm actually pretty good at learning. now,
Yeah, I was
I'm pretty
I
good
was
at
expecting that. Yeah.
yeah, pretty good at teaching myself new things, and so that's also very helpful to know. I mean, it's helpful to know that if I keep trying, I'll probably get it. There's a good chance that I will succeed. Um, and yeah, so I just keep working on it.
And once, let's say that the subject is clear to you, you understand those layers and the story is making sense to you, then how do you convert it into a video? Is it, do you try and bring the same process how you have understood it, or you actually try and abstract it and then share it through the storytelling and
Yeah, I definitely try to think about it in terms of a story.
mhm,
Like my process of learning is terrible, um, but learning kind of distills everything. And so what I try to do with almost every video is at the beginning I try to start with um, some data set that is simple enough that I can illustrate it, but complicated enough that it shows off whatever the features of the methodology are. So for example, when I created my first video on neural networks, I had a data set that consisted of 3 data points. Uh, it was one data point at the origin, so it was 0, 0, and
mhm,
then we moved over on the x-axis, and then we went up to 1 on the y-axis, so we went up, and there was the second data point right there, and then we went a little bit further down the x-axis and went back down to 0. So the data goes up, and then it goes back down. And so it's a really simple 3-point data set. But what's cool about it is that 3-point data set doesn't work well with linear regression, right?
yeah,
Because it goes up and then it goes back down, and linear regression
it
doesn't
will
really
just
work.
flatter. Yeah,
Yeah,
it will
exactly.
just
Well,
create a
yeah, you
yeah,
can't fit a straight line to it. So it's simple enough that we can see it. It's only 3 points, but it's complicated enough that we need something more powerful than linear regression to model that data. And so I start with that and I say, so what are we going to do? Well, the cool thing is neural networks can fit any shape to any data set. So in this case, we can fit like a bell-shaped curve to this data set, and we can do that with a neural network. And so I start with that to give people sort of a big overview, sort of main idea of what the goal of what neural networks are capable of doing. They can fit a bell-shaped curve to your data set. And then we start diving into the details of how it works and how it does that, sort of one step at a time. And that's my general approach. Is I try to start with something that, like, maybe we could have, uh, you know we've got other methods that we already know how to use, but I try to come up with a data set that's simple, easy to draw, but doesn't work with the existing methods that we already have. Or if it does, there's probably some caveat or some downside, something that is kind of a little off. And then we introduce the new method as a way to solve this problem, as a way to progress in our understanding of how to fit things to data.
interesting, interesting. And during this process, you also came out with your own book,
Yep.
right? When did that come out, and how can people get a copy of the book if they want to?
Yeah, so I've got a book called The StatQuest Illustrated Guide to Machine Learning, and it's been out for about 2 years right now.
Mhm.
And it's available a lot of places. Depending on where you are, it can be kind of tricky. But you can just get it in the United States, you can just get it from Amazon. If you're in Europe, you can get it from Amazon. And in India, for example, in theory, you can get it from Amazon, but there's pirated versions out there as well, and
Okay.
and
Oh,
and that
wow.
can make it complicated.
Mhm.
However, you can get it directly from the publisher.
Okay.
I think they do free shipping, and I've got the reason they have a special price point. Uh, it's a really, it's very affordable, relatively speaking. I think they sell it for half price in India
Okay.
that they sell it in the U.S.
Mhm.
And the reason why it's crucial to get it from them is every page is full color. And I use the
Oh,
color sort of instructionally, to
yeah,
try to highlight things. And so it's really important to get the color version. Anyways, it's about 2 years old. I love it. It covers all kinds of machine learning techniques and methodologies. So it's a real good sort of introduction to the whole field. Um, and it's been out for 2 years. And I've just started sort of diving into writing a book that's all about neural networks. So
oh,
the first book was
cool.
very broad and covered all kinds of topics, which is great because if you're a data scientist or a data analyst, you need to have all these tools in your tool belt. But I've been doing so many videos on neural networks. There's so much material to cover, and they're so popular right now and so cool, right?
Yeah,
That I felt I would deserve a whole book on its own, and so I've just started writing a book on neural networks, and hopefully we'll have that available at by the end of the year.
by the end of the year. Okay,
Yeah,
looking forward to that
yeah.
then. Uh, and now you are, as you mentioned, you are evaluating a few consulting opportunities, or maybe going back to lab. So how does your day look like right now, and what are your future plans?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's one thing that's kind of funny is you think if your full-time job is to make YouTube videos, then all you do all day is do YouTube videos. But as you know,
Difficult.
it's you're actually running a business. And there's all kinds of business things that have to be taken care of every single day.
Yeah.
There's customer service. People will, they have a problem with their download, or they do, they bought this, but they meant to buy this. I get emails from people that, or they want a refund or something like that. So I have to deal with like customer service stuff. My website goes down. I have to like, I'm the system administrator for my website. So I've got to like log in and get the website working again. Um, there's all these little things. I have to have meetings with people. So yeah, I ended up only spending a couple hours, maybe 3 hours a day, kind of actually working on a video. There's always stuff that's coming up, and
Mhm.
that's mostly focused on running a business, and the actual video making it ends up being a relatively small part of the overall effort. So that's the way it looks like today. um, it it might be nice if I could have like 1 day a week, where I'm actually consulting or working in a lab or doing something with actual data, not just pretend data sets, but real data sets where uh where we have a real goal, of, like trying to find a cure for a disease or trying to figure out why people are getting sick. Um, to me, that's really interesting, and it really kind of pushes you to be the best you can when there's sort of high stakes like that behind the data. So that maybe we'll transition to that. We'll have to see if I can streamline the business side of things and have it take a little less time.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
and how has been your own experience with generative AI, the tools which have come out? You did mention the state
Hmm.
space models, but
Yeah.
more broadly, how has been generative AI for you?
I mean, I found them very useful in very specific contexts, right? If I
Hmm.
want to write a program, it's a great for me. It's a great way to get a rough draft of that program. Um, the catch is, I don't want to just like run the program and have it work, but I want to teach. I want to create a program that I can use to teach. And so the generative AI is sort of a somewhat of a mess in terms of like it gives me a rough draft, but it's a very rough draft because it, like changes coding style halfway through. It doesn't, some the comments are sometimes useful, sometimes not useful at all. Sometimes the code is very dense, and sort of hard to understand, and you have to like pick it apart. And that's sort of been my experience in general. Is like everything that I get out of it is a rough draft, and pretty rough in terms of the way I want to use it specifically. Is I want to be able to teach people from it,
Mm,
and that means I've spent a lot of time cleaning it up, but and streamlining it and maybe breaking down some of the more complicated lines into multi-line statements, you know. But it gets me started, and it
Yeah.
does that for a lot of things. It just gets me started on a lot of things. If I like with wording, if I'm trying to explain something, I can get a very very rough draft of that from ChatGPT or any of the generative AIs. And what it does, which is awesome, is it turns what I call the blank page problem into an editing problem. The blank page is like the most intimidating thing ever, when the screen is completely blank and you can put anything there you want. um that can be very intimidating to even know where to begin, and ChatGPT gives me a place to begin, and all of a sudden I've got stuff that I can go, oh, this isn't really what I want, but I can change it, to make it
Yeah.
what I want. And it's much easier for me to see what changes need to be done to something that's already on the page than it is to just look at a blank page and figure, start from there. And so it's, in that respect, it makes things a little faster. um so it's been useful in those couple of ways, but it hasn't been like, I've got friends that like use it all the time, all day, every day, and it really hasn't been
Mhm.
that kind of a tool for me. It's something I use maybe once every other week for about 5 minutes, just to get like a real
Got it.
rough sense of something, and then I'll spend the rest of the time working on my own.
And have you, because there is so much creativity you use in creating these videos, etc. So have you used it for brainstorming or just getting a few more creative ideas? So instead of the assistant side, just using it as a brainstorming tool, is that something which you've explored?
Uh,
And
I've done that a little bit. Yeah, I've done it a little bit. And it's not bad. Like, I'll say, give me a what chapter should I have in my book on neural networks? And it'll give me a rough outline of what chapters I should use. Um uh but the thing is whatever it does, whatever ChatGPT does is, yeah, you have to remember that it's kind of an average. It's looking at
yeah,
all these books, all these
correct.
websites that teach these things, and it's basically giving you an average of those things.
True.
And so if I follow it too carefully, what I'll create is just mediocre and average. And so
Yeah,
you have to be very careful with that, because I want my stuff to be exceptional. I want it to be outstanding. I want it to be above average. And so you have to be really willing to put in a lot of extra work beyond sort of just like taking its ideas from you. But sometimes it's great. Like recently created my own podcast, which I'm excited about, and that's something I'm using to kind of learn what people are doing with their data and how they're doing it. But um but I had to come up with like a little catchphrase or some little like description for the platforms, and I was like, I don't know, how do you describe a podcast? And I used ChatGPT to do that for me, and it was great. It gave me
yeah.
something that needed to be edited, but it was like it was way better
Mm,
than what I was going to come up with on my own. So it was a huge success for me. I was like, wow, this could have taken weeks, and it ended up taking about an hour and a half. So it was a big time saver.
yeah, interesting. Uh, Josh, usually towards the end of the
Hmm.
episode, we do a few rapid fire question with the guests, and the
Okay.
idea is to just know you better as a person. So I would love to hear whatever first few thoughts come to your mind on these questions.
Okay.
So, uh, which YouTube channel do you watch the most?
That's a good question. I actually, I used to be a huge fan of Three Blue One Brown. I haven't
Yeah,
watched one of
I
his
could.
videos in a long time,
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
because they're so good,
Yeah.
that they kind of intimidate me and discourage me. so and so I don't actually watch his stuff anymore. Mostly, to be honest, mostly what use YouTube for is for music. I find
Hmm.
I use it for listening to music.
Okay. And what kind of music?
Oh, anything I find. I've got real eclectic tastes. I'll listen to anything.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And what does your weekend look like?
Yeah, I actually have a pretty uh I go running in the morning.
Okay.
I go jogging Saturday and Sunday mornings. I go jogging.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday night, every Saturday night, I have dinner with my old boss, the one that fired me and told me I had to leave the lab. We're still good friends, and I have dinner with him every Saturday night. And in between, I spend a lot of time working because nobody wants to have meetings on the weekends. And so I
That is
can
true.
get a ton of work done. But I also play music. I have friends over on the weekends. I'll go for an adventure. I do all those things, all those fun things as well.
Interesting. Very interesting. And if there was one change which you would want to do in education as it is today, what would that be?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Mhm.
I can tell you one thing I wish YouTube would change. How's that?
Mhm.
That's something
Yeah.
I'm very aware of.
Mhm.
So, so when you say like I write a book and it's a great book, but things change, times change, and I need to release a new edition, it has updated problems that people can relate to and things like that. Well, when you do that in a book and you go to a bookstore, you know, they've got like a spot on the shelf for your book. And when the new edition comes out, they just put it where the old book one was. And so you kind of go to the same place and you find the new edition. And that's the way it is on Amazon too. You can say like you're really interested in the StatQuest Illustrated Guide to the Machine Learning. You go there, it's going to say, there it is, and it'll say you can buy this. But Amazon also says, oh, by the way, there's a new
There is
edition.
a new addition.
You can click
Yeah.
here and you go to the new edition. So they give you all this stuff. I wish there was a way to do that with YouTube videos. Um, but there isn't. And that's very aggravating for me. It'd be really great because, the algorithm for YouTube is, likes and how many people are viewing and how many people are clicking and things like that. And it's unclear to me how to update my videos and take advantage of the fact that everybody likes the old video and everybody has links to the old video. How do I get them to go to the new one, the updated version and things like that? That would be one thing I would change if I could change YouTube, and it would make my life easier, and that would make me happy.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that. And
yeah.
one last question. Any books which had big impact on you or which you would recommend to the listeners?
Yeah, so there's a book that actually I don't really remember many details from other than the introduction, and it's called QED. By
Hmm.
Richard Feynman, and the
Yeah.
QED stands for quantum electrodynamics. And in the introduction of that book, um, I read it a long, long time ago, but it's the book came as a dare. Somebody dared Richard Feynman to write a book about quantum mechanics in such a way that an English professor could understand it. And that had a
Wow.
profound impact on me. That the fact that this guy, this great physicist, goes, okay, I'll see if I can do that. And then he wrote this book that was very easy to read. And
Yeah.
I remember I read it a long, long time ago, and I remember specific details from it. But the thing that really impacted me was the fact that he was trying to explain something incredibly complicated and esoteric to an English professor. And I think about that all the time when I make my videos as like a goal of I want my videos to be approachable by anyone. I don't want people to be, yeah, you have to already be a machine learning practitioner to be able to watch my stuff. I want it to be English majors or music majors or artists. I want them to be able to watch my videos and also understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely agree. And yeah, that's a fascinating book. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, Great. Thanks a lot, Josh, for taking time out and sharing that passion with
Yeah.
which you create your videos and the book. So great to have you, and looking forward to the book which you're working on. So
Oh,
we'll love to order that as soon as it is out.
thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's been really great being here, and I'm thank you very much for the opportunity to be a part of this.
Thank you. Thanks.